Hi everyone. So in this video I'm going to be talking about revealing my lupus diagnosis. One of the major things that I had to deal with immediately following my diagnosis was the question of whether or not I should tell people about my condition. When I was first diagnosed, at that point I had been sick for months. So some of my friends, family, and colleagues were aware that I was sick because I was going around asking for medical advice. And of course, it affected my work and my social life. I couldn't show up for work because I was sick or I wasn't able to go out with my friends at that time. So people started asking questions and started talking. Ultimately, my decision to share my diagnosis was made public on Facebook. I shared a video and I posted it on Facebook. I'm not saying it's the right decision to make or if there really is a right decision or a right way to come out and tell the world I have an incurable medical condition or if it should even be done. But I would like to share with you some of the reasons that I did, hopefully to help anyone who needs the insight to make an informed decision. So the first thing that I thought about, or the first thing that I considered in sharing my lupus diagnosis was that I wanted people to know about my condition from me. I knew that people were talking about me because they would approach my family members asking about my health condition. And since my community is relatively small, I knew that once I started telling one person or a few people, that other people would eventually find out. So instead of allowing that speculation to grow, I wanted to get ahead of it so that when people found out, they would hear it from me personally. I guess in my head, what I was thinking was that if it was going to come out anyway, I might as well get ahead of it and control the information that was being released. That way, I would be able to explain my condition without people freaking out about it because it was an exaggerated version of the truth. I was also getting individual messages at that time. People were asking me how I was doing and having to explain to each individual person, telling and retelling the story of what happened was exhausting. So I needed a means to share it with people that I felt needed to know without having to tell it multiple times over. So another reason I decided to come out with my diagnosis on Facebook was because I needed to say it out loud for it to be real in my head. It's actually surreal thinking about that time of my life because it feels like a bad dream. Facebook reminds me every year about through the memories about the very, very first lupus video I made, and I still haven't been able to rewatch it because I don't like seeing myself that sick. And it's weird to think about that period as different stages. Like I got through the stage of finding out that I was sick, finding a diagnosis, moving on to the next stage of receiving a confirmation, and then venturing into this new stage of accepting this confirmed diagnosis. It's still something that I struggle with, actually. And before I even got confirmation from my doctor, I readied myself to possibly receive a diagnosis. But being ready and then actually combating and accepting a diagnosis are different challenges. I was struggling more getting my family to wrap their heads around the fact that I have a lifelong medical condition, that I hadn't fully been able to sit on the implications that it had on me and on my life. I needed to get the word out to my family because I knew a lot of them were worried about me. They knew I was sick, they knew I had been asking questions, and so I had to reassure them that I was okay. For me, it felt like I had sent out the search party in asking all of these medical questions, that when I finally found the answer, it was my responsibility to call off the search and tell them that number one, I was okay, that I was getting treatment to get better, and number two, this was something I would have to battle for the rest of my life. Taking number two into consideration, I knew that I felt compelled to share my diagnosis with everybody because in the long run, it would be easier for me to interact with people. Basically, because I wouldn't have to explain to them why I do things in a certain way. There are certain things that have changed because of my lupus diagnosis. There are certain food that I don't eat. Like I can't go out into the sun, or I have to bundle myself up if ever I do. I take medicines every single day. So people seeing that, and if they don't know what's going on, it might seem peculiar. So I felt that it would have been easier for me to interact with people if they knew, oh, she has a lupus condition, that's why she's acting the way she is. Also at that time, I felt like I really needed help. I was drowning. I was going through a lot. I mean, I just received my diagnosis. Physically, my body felt like it was being beaten up from the inside out. I had to undergo all of these tests. I had to prepare for a biopsy. I had to take all of these different medicines that I wasn't used to. I had to learn what lupus was, and then I had to figure out what to do with that information. So there was a lot that I had to deal with, and I desperately needed help. I wanted to talk to my friends about it. Like, I wanted to go to my best friends and my brothers and just discuss it with them. And since none of them knew what was going on at that time, it was very difficult for me to actually do that without having to have that introductory conversation over and over again. So there was always that option for me to share my lupus story with a select number of people. And that was always an option. But my decision to let it out there was one that I made in that moment because I felt that it was best for that moment. So remember that at that time, I honestly didn't know what I was doing. I was dealing with a lot of information. It was very overwhelming. I didn't know the proper means to actually handle it. There is no lupus guidebook or handbook that tells you whether or not you should disclose this information or go to the public about it. But at that time, I was pretty desperate for someone, for anybody to help me out. And I couldn't do that if they didn't know what was going on. So I kind of felt like maybe there would be somebody in my audience, somebody in my friends list who knows what lupus is about and could help me out or share some information or point me in the right direction. So that was part of the reason I shared my story on public on Facebook. Another point of consideration though was that I knew when I hit that share button that it was a moment of no turning back. I knew that once this information was out there, I couldn't undo it. I couldn't take it back and say I'm not a lupus patient because it's going to be all over social media. But in that moment, I wanted it out because I couldn't see myself moving forward by myself if this was kept a secret. I wasn't strong enough at that point to be able to do it on my own. And so I needed to say it out loud also because it made it real in my world. because keeping it a secret, it would have just been me. But then it's weird to explain, but saying it out loud actually made it real for everybody else, I guess. And in the long run, I think it was good for me because I was able to receive the support. I felt supported by my community. I was able to talk to people about it openly, and that is ultimately what kept me afloat through that difficult time, because again, I was so clueless when I started out, and I needed the all the help that I could get. Looking at it years down the line, and me talking about it now, more than anything else, it's me talking to my newly diagnosed self. There's one quote that keeps me motivated in sharing all of this with strangers, and that is, if you don't see the book you want on the shelf, write it. So there's so much information that I wish I had. I know that it's out there now. Actually, like with more research, I know that there are a lot of people talking about lupus, and you can get this information. But knowing, there's so many things that I wish I knew, and I wish I could have told myself, knowing the things that I had known now. So ultimately, that's my hope, that I would be able to share this, and that it will reach that diagnosed lupus person that comes after me, and it would help them figure this entire mess out. Whew, I don't know if that made sense, but there's so much that I wish I could tell my former self, and in this way I feel like I'm divulging that now. Okay, so another thing, I'm not necessarily proud of being a lupus patient, but I know that it is something that I am not ashamed of. Being a lupus patient is something that I did not go into willingly. I didn't have a choice in the matter, and I don't actually think that I could have done anything to stop it. If I were not diagnosed back then, I would probably have been diagnosed later in life. What I did choose to do, though, is share that information with everybody else. Perhaps if I had stayed fit earlier in life, or if I had made better choices in terms of my health, I would have delayed my lupus from coming into fruition for a couple of years. But from what I know about it, part of it is genetic. So you are born with the genes for lupus, and these lay dormant for some time. It could be years, it could be decades, and then it could be triggered by something in the external environment, such as stress, exposure to sunlight, an infection, or all of the above. And once it is active, or once you have a flare that activates it, there is no going back. So you could get diagnosed in that major flare itself, or not. So there are some people that I know who have experienced multiple flares but didn't know that they were flares because they were not clinically diagnosed. I was diagnosed when I was 24 years old. And perhaps if I wasn't so stressed out with my life at that time, I could have gone a few more years without suffering a major flare. But I'm just relieved that I am done with that entire chapter of my life, and I know exactly what it is I am dealing with. In hindsight, I think I've come to terms with my decision of sharing it with the world, but it did not come without repercussions. It's something that I cannot undo, since it's on my pages, it's on my social media, I'm making videos about it. So people like strangers, my future employers, acquaintances, and friends all get to know that I have lupus. I always get caught off guard still when somebody I'm not that close to or somebody I don't really talk to comes up to me in person or messages me through Facebook or through social media to tell me that they have read my posts or have watched my videos. It's both reassuring and disconcerting at the same time because it makes me aware that people are actually watching or reading. I do spend some time worrying about what people think about me talking about my lupus so frequently. But ultimately, I stand by my decision. I think I have a few reasons for it, and I talk about this on my social media. But let's go over some of the pros and cons about coming out about my lupus diagnosis. Some of the pros. I do not have to tell people in person that I have lupus if they have already read about it in my posts. That conversation always turns out to be at least a little bit awkward. 9 out of 10 times people don't actually know what lupus is or have a vague idea about what lupus is. So if they're hearing it for the first time, it gets a little awkward, especially the part where I talk about how lupus is a lifelong medical condition with no cure. They seem to feel a little bit sad for me. I don't know if it's in my head or if it's in real life, but sometimes I get treated a little bit differently. And so it's always a very strange, very awkward conversation to have. Another advantage of having my lupus diagnosis out in the open is that there are definitely some people, certain people in my life that I feel need to know about my condition because I interact with them so frequently. At work, for example, I always disclose that I have a medical condition because there are certain things I cannot do because of my condition. Like I cannot go out into the sun and expose myself to the sun for long periods of time. So I inform my employer about this because so that they would not send me out on substitution for PE class in the field, for example, because I know that is something that I cannot do. My friends and family have been exceptional about my condition. They are people that I keep in the know about my health condition because I have to frequently cancel or change plans, sometimes because of my condition. So there are really times when I physically cannot go through with certain plans that we've made, or there are times that I act strangely because of my condition, and having them know about it makes it easier for me to talk about it with them. And a lot of times, since we are all newbies at lupus and having to care for somebody with lupus, I feel like we're going through the experiences together. So that's a very big advantage, that I feel supported because they know about my condition and I can openly talk about it with them. Even though that there are some major advantages to having my condition and my lupus condition, the knowledge of my lupus condition out, there are definitely some cons. So knowing people know about my condition does kind of make me feel exposed. I always feel a little bit vulnerable when I post on any of my social media about lupus because it details some intimate aspects of my life, and especially because not all of my experiences with lupus are pleasant. So there are times when I have to talk about mental health or some of the more difficult aspects of being a lupus patient that I would rather not talk about sometimes because it's not the nicest things to discuss. I do feel like sometimes get treated differently because of my condition. There are times when people treat me a little bit like I'm fragile because they know that I am sick. Or there are times when I feel like I wish I could go around and act like a normal person, or get seen at least as a normal person. And I can't do that because people already know that I have lupus. Um, yeah. I think there are times when I do get an overreaction from my condition. The biggest overreaction I do get is from people who have never heard of my condition before, so they assume that I am dying. And like they hear that there is no cure, they hear that it's a lifelong condition, and it registers to them that they feel like I am dying. And I know this because they treat me differently. I don't know if it's in my head, but that's what I feel like. For example, there are times that I have been on a job interview where they have asked me more questions about lupus and my condition than they have about my qualifications and my capabilities. Now, to be clear, I do not mind people asking me or talking about lupus. I actually like that people are concerned or are curious and that they want to know more about it. That is fine. But it does make me wonder if the interest is genuinely on me as a person, or if people are just curious over the fact that they have met somebody in real life who actually has a medical condition. I've talked about this before in my post, but I often feel like an exotic oddity in the hospital among medical practitioners because my condition is relatively rare. And so sometimes that also translates in real life when I meet people for the first time and they have never heard of what I have and they want to know more. They kind of see me as this odd creature. But I have actually met some people who have lupus and have never disclosed it to people except for their family and friends. So that is definitely an option. With anonymity, they are able to go about their days as if they were not sick, as if they were completely fine. And I actually think that is completely fine if no complications occur. Unfortunately, more often than not, complications do occur when you are a lupus patient. So I think the biggest problem you might encounter if you don't tell people that you have a condition is misunderstandings or misconceptions. There are definitely times that the limitations brought and complications brought about my lupus has made it difficult to deal with other people because they do not know what is going on the inside, if that makes sense. What I have found out is that a lot of people are quite considerate of you if they know that you have a medical condition. Because lupus symptoms do not always present themselves as apparent physical manifestations, people do not always believe you when you say, I feel sick, especially when you look fine or you do not look sick. Chronic pain and chronic fatigue are common problems that lupus patients have, and for the most part, these are manageable. But there are definitely times when it gets unbearable, and because it's on the inside, it gets quite hard to explain to people around you that you are feeling unwell when people do not know what is going on with your medical condition and you do not look sick. So, the deciding factor for me in sharing my diagnosis with the world is the feeling that I finally have a voice and something that not everybody has the means to talk about. Of course, anybody can talk about lupus. The information about lupus is on the internet and very much Googleable. But not everybody has the ability to take it from the perspective of a patient, from someone who has actually gone through some of these things and has dealt with the consequences. So much about the disease is hard to explain, and so much of it I did not fully understand until I actually experienced it myself. There is also so much that goes unsaid that I wish I had been informed about when I was newly diagnosed. And so when knowledge is limited, it is something that becomes valuable. So I feel like having the insights I have gained from my experiences, this is valuable, but it's not really going to help anybody else if I just kept it to myself. So ultimately, when I made that first video, I always had somewhat of an intention of, if I get through this, if I am somehow able to survive this ordeal, I have to be able to share it to somebody who would be able to benefit from what I have learned from it. So that is what I'm doing now. Ultimately, there is no black or white answer to whether or not you should disclose your medical condition. I cannot tell you that. But what I do hope to be able to do with sharing my experiences is to be able to give you a better idea to make an informed decision. So I am going to end with a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt. You must do the thing you think you cannot do. I think that's basically the main takeaway from my diagnosis, personally. Maybe I was brave to go through all of that and survive, and maybe I was brave to sit here and talk about it, but it's not like I had much choice in the matter. I needed to do what I did to get through it, and even if I did not like a minute of it, and even if there were times that I did not think I could actually get through it, I did it anyway because I needed to. So, thanks for watching, and I will see you all in my next video.